All right, we are recording. So once again, welcome. We are just going to briefly go over some housekeeping. I'm sure most of us have become fairly familiar with the virtual world, but just in case, just a couple of items such as please silence your cell phone if you aren't using it, obviously. This is just to help keep down background noises. As I already mentioned, today's meeting is being recorded. And also, in order to reduce background noises, please keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. You are welcome to use the chat box to comment, or, of course, because we are in the GoToMeeting setting, you can mute and unmute yourself as you desire. We will also be using Mentimeter throughout the meeting. If you're unfamiliar with Mentimeter, basically it is a online live polling tool. You go to menti.com using a computer, tablet, or cellular device. You enter in the code 280297, and then you'll be able to participate in the polling that we do throughout the meeting. If you are uncomfortable with Mentimeter, you of course can use the chat box or unmute yourself. To test out Mentimeter, I came up with two project relevant questions since Field of Dreams is on the corridor. What year did the Field of Dreams officially open? And this I went by Google. So West Melbourne folks, if I'm wrong by Google, let me know. But basically, if you would like to test using Mentimeter now, get on your cell phone, tablet, or computer, go to menti.com. Use the code 280297 and enter in what year you think the Field of Dreams officially opened. We'll give everyone a couple minutes to get set up with Menti.
Okay, I entered the code, but it's not saying it's found. 280297 with spaces.
280297. You should not have to put in spaces.
Oh, that's probably what I did wrong. 280972 could not be found. Oh, because
280297.
97. All right, try again. 280297. Okay. All right, I'm gonna minimize
This is why we do the test questions, is to troubleshoot. All right. Is anyone else having any trouble, or is everyone else getting it, or just doesn't want to participate? All right, well, we have one more question after this, so we'll go ahead. And so, according to my Google research, 2016 was when it officially opened. Scott and Christy, that's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. So our next project relevant test question is, and you'll understand more later on, or if you've done research by looking at the documentation we already sent out, why do they call the curved extension of the asphalt a loon? Or I guess of asphalt a loon, where we're dealing with R-cuts or some of the other roundabout, or not roundabout, excuse me, U-turn engineered intersections. So, and unanimously, it resembles the shape of a loon head. I did not catch anyone up with it is as crazy as a loon, or loons like to fly over them. So, all right, well, I will jump back over to our PowerPoint. and turn it over to Travis and Ryan to present our information.
Perfect. All right, so we'll do this. Let's see. All right, I like it. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Travis Hills. I'm with Kittleson and Associates. I am joined by Ryan Mansfield, who's also on the call, and he'll be presenting about half the presentation, so you don't have to listen to me talk for the next hour and a half. And then David Bennett, who's with Contour. He's also on the call to answer all the hard drainage and utility questions that we may get from you all this afternoon. So what we'll do for today, like I said, we appreciate you all joining us. We sent out a bunch of materials ahead of time, so hopefully folks have been able to get in, look at the different concepts that we sent over. If y'all have any questions as we kind of go through this, feel free to, I think, Sarah, are we doing the raise your hand, or are we just having folks unmute and ask questions?
The raise your hand function is not in GoToMeeting, so they just mute and unmute or utilize the chat box. Laura's monitoring the chat box.
Perfect. Today. And so, I'm pretty free flowing. So if y'all, we don't have that big of a group. So if folks want to unmute and just ask questions, we can go that route. So meeting agenda, what we're going to be going through, we have a lot to discuss. So our last meeting was back in January. We've done a lot of work since then. So we want to catch everybody up on where we're at. And then hopefully towards the end, we'll talk about our public meeting that we have on the schedule for August 26th. So for the meeting agenda today, a lot of the first part's just going to be a review of what we've already talked about. So just really making sure that, it's been 7 months and a coronavirus later since we met. So want to make sure we kind of catch everybody up, get everybody on the same page about where we were at back in January. And then we'll talk through some of the analysis that we've been going through over the past few months, hopefully talk through the concepts and the results, and then we'll talk next steps. So the goals and the schedule, so the project goals, so I've talked about this a few times. So we wanted to assess the need and the feasibility of widening the road from 4 to 6 lanes. So as we determined in one of our earlier meetings, I think it was actually our kickoff meeting, we determined that widening was not going to be explored. The 4 to 6 lane widening just didn't really match with the future context of the corridor, the goals of West Melbourne, and so we didn't explore those options. We more wanted to focus on pedestrian and bicycle facility improvements, and then our intersection improvements that we're going to be going into a lot of detail about today. So addressing existing and future congestion and safety issues. So we're hoping that a lot of the discussion we have today on those intersection improvements will address those issues that we're seeing out there. And then in continuing to enhance and incorporate multimodal improvements, that's a really big part of the typical section discussion that we had back in January. We'll just go through those one more time to refresh everybody. So our project schedule, so we are here, we're in July. It's our 3rd technical committee meeting. We have one more in December once we get through our preferred concept plan development. Like I mentioned before, we have a public meeting coming up here in August, and so this is why we wanted to meet with you all now, make sure we're heading in the right direction before we went and showed anything to the public here in about a month. So a quick refresher on the typical sections. So as everyone knows, we have a 4-lane road. We have 4 12-foot lanes. We have about a 15-foot to 17, or it's 15 to 20 feet roughly median. And then we have those paved shoulders with the swales and the sidewalks outside of those swales. So we looked at 4 different alternatives. So the buffered bike lanes, this was our first alternative. It was relatively our least impactful. So adding a little bit more to that paved shoulder, adding in that buffered bike lane, and then also going to the outside, adding in a little bit wider sidewalks as well. Our second alternative, we were looking at shared use paths to the outside, and so pulling those bicycles off the roadway itself. We know that the travel speeds are a little bit higher out there. Some people may not feel comfortable, so we want to create a more shared environment outside of the roadway proper, 12 feet wide on both sides for those pedestrians and bicyclists. We'd also be looking to reduce the travel lanes and go curb and gutter in this section as well, or as part of this alternative. So then the last 2 alternatives somewhat piggyback on each other a little bit. They're a similar type approach. It's 3A and 3B. So 3A, we're looking at protected bicycle lanes. And so these would be one way, one direction on each side of the road. So if you're going north on the right side, you'd want to be going, or if you want to go north, you'd be going on the right side of the road. South is on the left side of the road in the typical section. We have those 11-foot lanes, and then, like I mentioned, on the outside, those protected bike lanes, and those would be separated facilities, and they would be separated even from the sidewalk themselves. So a little bit of a different concept than the shared use path. And then, like I mentioned, alternative 3B, it's a little bit of a different take on the protected bicycle lanes concept, and it's called a cycle track. And so we showed this example as part of our last meeting. We showed some examples of how these have been implemented as well. But essentially, it's a bi-directional cycle track or bicycle way on the side of the road. We were looking to put it on either the right side or the left side of the road, depending on where we're at along the corridor. And so we've given a little bit of thought to maybe putting the cycle track on the west side down when we're Eber to Wingate, and then you switch back over to the right side from Wingate to Milwaukee. This hits the different future land uses that we see, or existing and future land uses that we see along the corridor, targeting, you know, where we have the schools, where we have the parks and everything else. And then in addition to the cycle track, we would also have that wider sidewalk for pedestrians as well. And so, you know, those were the 4 options that we presented. It seemed like we had some buy-in to take these to the public. The big takeaway with all of this is that, you know, A, nothing is set in stone. Obviously, we haven't selected a preferred alternative yet. That won't occur until after our public meeting, and we'll be getting back with you all on that. The other part about this, and I was talking with David a little bit about this a couple weeks ago, is, you know, we can switch some of the elements kind of between these different concepts as well. So what you'll see in the next slide is we have prepared a measures of effectiveness matrix. And when we start talking about, you know, drainage, utility impacts, some different things like that, you know, the elements that we include in these typical sections in these different alternatives aren't necessarily, oh, if we go with alternative A, we will not have curb and gutter, or if we go with alternative, or I guess it's alternative 2, we will have curb and gutter. That's not necessarily the case. And so I just want to say that they're still somewhat in draft form, and we may be able to tweak things as we get to preferred. So I think I heard somebody going to ask a question. Somebody was going to ask a question.
Am I muted?
You're good, Scott. Yep.
Going back to the previous slide where you talked about the cycle track and the west and east, you briefly mentioned land uses, existing versus undeveloped, and the schools as why that particular exhibit, you know, shows it, assuming we're looking from south to north and north is up, you know, showing it on the east side, which would be Wingate to Milwaukee. Obviously that captures the primary school trips for the schools being on the east side. And just by memory, I'm thinking where Christy helped me with this, we have the one undeveloped property on that side between Milwaukee, Heritage Oaks, and at the south east corner of Heritage Oaks and Minton. And I don't think we have any other undeveloped properties in that reach other than the one commercial property. So I don't know how that affects their future right in, right out driveway to that commercial development.
Yeah, Scott, you're correct. They haven't identified for that commercial parcel that's left from that subdivision called Heritage Point. Where
and they won't have full, they will never get full Minton access, but they have to have right in, right out access. So I'm not sure how a cycle track there, not knowing enough about it, you know, affects that conflict point of a right in, right out for a future commercial center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we know that that's one of the kind of primary concerns with the cycle track option, because it's if you're on the east side north of Wingate, you have those types of issues of a potential future development. But if you're if you're looking at other parts of the corridor, there are I mean, you do have the driveways where the buses come out just north of Wingate on the east side. That's going to be an issue. I mean, there's I think there's current development. You have, I can't remember. It's showing up as vacant on Google Earth, but I think you mentioned it's in that kind of southeast quadrant of Milwaukee, Heritage Oaks, and Minton. And then there was some houses that I think were going in kind of behind the commercial right
That's
now.
That's correct. And their only access is to Heritage Oaks. But the commercial property that's vacant on the corner, that will take its primary access right in, right out on Minton, undoubtedly.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, those are issues that I think we'll cross. We'll address them when we get to that point. I think the cycle track option has to go through a couple more hoops before we can get to that point of, I mean, it has to become the preferred alternative, which, we'll talk about that in our next meeting of what, we'll have to have a pretty good conversation of what do we think is A, realistic, and B, what can be implemented in a relatively short time frame, because there may be certain alternatives that you're just looking at a 15 to 20 year project, because potentially due to some of the impacts that we have. And so but yeah, I think Scott, you raise a good point, and we'll have to consider that as being maybe a negative for the cycle track option if that moves forward.
Well, and we have a fairly significant undeveloped on the west side. Now that has less issues with direct access to Minton, because it's got signalized access to 2 signals. But there's a fairly large undeveloped parcel that's only 500 foot deep. But sort of as we envision that development, sort of future building sort of towards Minton and parking circulation to the back of the property, but they would have access to both signalized intersections. So their access to Minton, they're going to want that, but they have signalized access from either end. And I would think because they're only 500 feet deep, and we want to try to bring customers to the back rather than the front under our sort of planning concepts, probably less important for thinking about a future driveway access. But then as you go further north on the west side, there's some existing parcels that have some access that are undoubtedly going to redevelop, someday. On the way.
And in that area that you're talking about, Scott, just so everyone knows, that's south of Flanagan and north of, at that point, instead of it being called Eber Boulevard, it's called Burdock.
Right. I think that's the only undeveloped parcel there. I mean, you got a huge reach of there, that's the park frontage, and obviously anything could be done there.
Right.
Okay,
and I think
sort of wanted to understand how that might affect future development with conflicts at driveways. Thank you.
Right. Appreciate it. All right. So kind of moving into our measures of effectiveness. And so this is a new slide. So we didn't have this prepared back in January. We've done a little bit of work to figure out how these different alternatives stack up just from a purely qualitative standpoint. So I haven't necessarily put any dollar values to anything yet, but really just wanted to get a broad brush, kind of high level overview of where things stand. And so looking at the different alternatives, just going down the list. So improving pedestrian mobility and safety And when we say moderate, low, high, and unanticipated, that's all compared to the existing condition. So when we're saying that we're going to improve pedestrian and bicycle mobility and safety, we're looking at in relation to each other. Alternative 2 is your highest. You're providing that wider shared use path well off the side of the road, whereas all the other alternatives have a smaller sidewalk, or it may be adjacent to bicycles, things like that. For bicycle mobility and safety, pretty much every alternative that pulls the bikes off the roadway is going to be your higher safety alternative. So the shared use paths, the cycle tracks, the protected bike lanes that are well off the road. Improve ADA transit access. So every alternative that we have comes with its own challenges, but we're going to work to make sure, we're going to work with Terry to make sure that whatever concept, whatever typical section we put our concept together for, that we're tying into all the different bus stops that are there as well. And we don't really see a difference between the different alternatives of getting to the physical bus stop. They all have the same amount of challenges, but we're hopefully going to overcome those through our concept plans and our coordinations with Terry.
Travis, this is Scott again.
Yep.
So the working assumption is that Route 20, which is southbound, survives sort of its current trial period, and those end up becoming permanent stops. Is that the assumption?
Terry, isn't it?
Scott, actually, I'm here,
Thank you.
and I would. I'm sorry, Sarah. Okay. Yeah. So, Scott, I believe I'll say this: there is no intention to remove Route 20. We've actually applied for funding for future years, so we've completed the demonstration grant period. We've had approval for it to continue service with the next 2 years. We don't have, although we would love to see ridership grow, we don't have any speculation or any intentions at this time that the route will be eliminated or even reduced. So we anticipate that those physical bus stops will become permanent stops.
Okay, but obviously that's an important assumption that we need southbound stops, and so the where and all the details, can be worked out as the study progresses, but probably a pretty important trigger point to make the assumption that not just the northbound stops, but the southbound stops are part of the plan.
Exactly, and if we have to, relocate some stops for the project, that's not going to be an issue. The northbound stops are a little bit more complicated because there's shelters at some of these locations, so those will be a little bit harder to relocate. But the stops on the opposite side of the road, we can always adjust as needed. And yes, that's the assumption. I agree with that. We will continue to operate service on that segment in that direction.
And just so everybody on the call understands, for the northbound route, the only stop that doesn't have a shelter is the stop that's just south of Milwaukee Heritage Oaks. And the reason we didn't put a shelter there was there's not enough right-of-way. But when that commercial development on that corner parcel develops, we will require additional right-of-way so that we can physically put a shelter there. Right now, we didn't have any right-of-way beyond the back of the existing sidewalk, but in order to do one there and accommodate the right turn lane, we plan on getting additional right-of-way as part of that development, but that would be not a current condition, but future condition. The desire would be to maintain that existing stop, but to be able to provide a shelter, but with some minor additional right-of-way, not part of this project, but that the city would simply try to get that at such time as that development were to proceed, knowing that we desire a shelter at that location.
And Scott, when this is Sarah, by the way, when we're discussing transit access and the bus stops, we're definitely doing it with the lens of that West Melbourne has a certain standard that you and the rest of the city staff, put forth with your development of the bus stops is, West Melbourne has gone above and beyond any other city in ensuring that their bus stops are beautiful, well kept, and that the majority of them have shelters when applicable. And so when we're talking and envisioning, the further development of this corridor, and we're thinking about Route 20 becoming permanent, we're envisioning that that same concept would be applied to that side of the road as well, since that's what we're assuming is the vision of the city, is to continue that high standard of transit access.
Yeah, that we would like that to be in the planning for sure.
Perfect. All right, awesome. So moving on from transit to vehicular mobility. And so some people may have looked at this and said, what do you mean there's no anticipated vehicular mobility improvements? And so keep in mind, this is purely from a typical section perspective. And so what we're hoping is that, improving vehicular mobility, we're not widening to 6 lanes. So we're not making that type of capacity improvement. But when we go to the intersections, we're hoping that some of our intersection concepts facilitate improved vehicular mobility at that level, which then in turn kind of trickles to the rest of the corridor. So
maybe a better label on that would be, through intersection improvements only.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can make that change. So okay. All right, so improving vehicular safety. So the reason why we have the low and the moderates in there is just because we are tightening the road up a little bit. And so in alternative 1, we are making a wider shoulder. Now it's not ideal. You don't want to have people driving on the shoulder, but you do have a little bit more recoverable area if somebody loses control or they drift off to the side of the road. Whereas our other alternatives, because we're tightening the road up, we're going to those 11-foot lanes, potentially adding curb and gutter, you do have that increased risk of what we call those run off the road crashes, where people may hit the curb and gutter, don't have as much pavement out there as you do today. So there is a little bit, maybe a little bit of a safety impact on that perspective.
So again, possible safety improvements at the intersections.
Yes, yep, that is correct. All right, so then for our last 4, so these are right-of-way, drainage, utility, and our cost comparison. So what you'll see is the right-of-way impacts, none anticipated. So that is strictly for the typical sections. When we get into the intersections, you'll see that there may be some right-of-way impacts with those what we're calling the loon areas or the U-turn areas to facilitate some of those movements along the corridor. But that's something that we'll talk about when we get into the intersection concepts. For the drainage impacts, we think there's going to be a pretty high impact for pretty much any alternative that we have. Now, what that high impact means as of right now, we're not 100% sure. So we haven't done detailed analysis to say, oh, you're going to need ponds or you don't need ponds, or what type of treatment we're going to have, off the side of the road in those swales. And so that's something that as we get in and as we start talking about preferred typical sections, we'll have those answers and we'll be able to say, yeah, you may need a pond, or no, you don't need a pond, depending on what you do, whether you curb and gutter or you leave it open, that kind of thing. So we'll have some of those answers here over the next few months.
But we think we're going to have some significant impact simply by some places, sort of the swale under different alternatives may have to get piped, and at intersections particularly, again, vertical curb and gutter, sort of a more urban roadway, not necessarily throughout depending on the alternative, but that there's going to be some drainage impacts as it becomes sort of more urban in character rather than rural. So again, you're going to sort of detail some of that when you get into the intersection analysis, particularly.
Yeah, and that, you know what, that'll kind of determine, uh, the amount of impact is, the existing swales out there, how many, how much of those do we have to enclose and pipe certain areas because of intersection improvements or whatever is determined to be the final typical section. Because, with the water management district that, if we start filling in open swales, we're going to start tripping thresholds for water quality treatment, maybe
Right.
needing ponds or something else. So those are the kinds of things that we have to balance. We can enclose swales and not get hammered by the water management district. We just have to be smart in how we do it and keep it at a minimum. Because I know,
Well, in the county, I don't know if we have anybody from County Public Works on the call, but I know we've sort of heard different discussions about how much existing county property with ponds, and again, if this isn't going from 4 to 6, is there enough capacity of existing holdings to make appropriate modifications? Again, I don't know if we have anybody from County Public Works on that's knowledgeable, but we sort of heard over time different discussions of, it's ready to go for 6 lanes with what we have. Well, not really, and okay. So would be, obviously that's going to be important because that's going to drive a whole bunch of the costs.
Yeah, I mean, if they've already got stuff set up for 6 lanes and we're not going 6 lanes, then.
Well, I think what we heard was that that's really not quite so. They sort of have more than they need for existing conditions, but my understanding is maybe not quite, full 6 lanes throughout, which is sort of what we've been hearing before. So I think the real, existing condition is somewhere in between is sort of my very limited understanding of that.
Okay, because the features that Travis is proposing, sidewalks and bike paths, things like that,
right,
really aren't going to get us nailed with, water quality treatment. It'll be, the big concern with this corridor will be, you've got an open swale system that provides some treatment to it, and it's collected and eventually taken to other facilities, the canals or existing ponds.
Right.
So if we remove those open swales, that's when they may want us to treat portions of that road where we remove the swale. So, I don't foresee having to treat an entire corridor, no matter what options we do. But there may be some areas where we might have to if we remove some of these swales. So.
Yeah, and that's going to drive a lot of the costs and sort of feasibility of getting to this sooner rather than later, probably. So it's probably good to know the county's holdings and how they might be modified to pick up whatever minor water quality might be required. But sort of get back into that right-of-way impacts, and again, if ideally we can pretty much live within existing right-of-way throughout for all purposes, that would send this project, a lot more feasible, a lot sooner, if that can truly be the case, not just for the main line, but again, sort of the intersections and again, kind of gets into the drainage too, where you've got to, in order to get additional lanes at intersections, you're going to have to be in the swale, and so.
Right, but usually if we can
into the desirability of trying to eliminate or minimize future right-of-way needs.
Right, if the improvements, swale mitigation is just happening around the intersections, then typically I think, I don't want to commit to anything right now, but typically, from my experience with other projects, we've been okay with the water management district. Because honestly, a lot of the intersection projects are exempt as long as the new lanes are under a certain length and things like that. So, typically we have a lot better shot at not having to provide extra treatment at intersections than we would for, the length of the entire corridor if we started removing swales.
Yeah, that's good. All right, sorry I took so long on that.
No, that's great. Great discussion. So, all right. So utility impacts, overall, we're thinking this is going to be relatively low. And the reason why it's not none is we just want to make sure that when we lay out the whatever concept it is that we're going to hopefully avoid any of those overhead lines that are out there. We also are working with David and his group on anything underground as well. But we typically will be pretty good on those unless we start getting into that swale and we have some underground pipe that we're going to have to deal with. But those are things that we'll discuss and we'll handle as part of the preferred concept. So then the overall cost comparison, like I said, this is purely qualitative from a kind of high level standpoint. Really, alternative one is your lowest cost, just generally speaking. You're going out, doing a little bit more pavement. Don't see many other impacts. Like I said, you may have some of the drainage things, but really from a cost perspective, your cost isn't very great with that one. Alternative two, you're just going to those shared use paths, so a little bit higher cost there. Alternative 3 and 4, or 3A and 3B, those are going to be your highest cost, relatively speaking. So when you're pretty much doing a full reconstruction of kind of the outside, out by the right-of-way line to build those protected bike lanes or that cycle track, and so you're getting into a lot higher construction costs when you're getting into that.
Again, sort of going back just one step a little bit, I think, utility impacts, again, we want to minimize that to the greatest extent we can. And obviously we do have some water and sewer, in the areas. I know that there's some underground communications in the corridor. Obviously the overhead's big, and, sort of leaving that alone, not going any widening to the west is good. FPNL recently converted those poles to their concrete hardened poles. We're talking with the county about trying to place street lights on those existing fairly new concrete FPL poles, and try to modify our existing interlocal for the Wickham. But the idea would be that it would be on the west side on existing poles to try to provide lighting, all the way across to the other side with, fairly, 200 watt equivalent LED, may not quite meet FDOT standards, but would pretty much be able to light the corridor, because right now there's just only a handful of existing street lights out there.
Right. So, okay. Yeah, I think, the ultimate plan is to minimize those utility impacts. I mean, the reason why we didn't put in anticipated is because we don't quite know all the details at this point. So, whenever we go and develop a typical section, we're going to make sure that those sidewalks to the outside or the shared use path, whatever we decide to put at the edge of the right-of-way line, is within those utilities, so that we're not going to just blindly put it at the right-of-way line and then, oh yeah, your utility impacts are $10 million. Like, we're going to stay away from that. So, all right. So I think if we're good there, I think I'm going to pass it off to Ryan.
Sounds good. I don't think I quite have control yet.
Be able to click over unless you gave up control. Oh, it says you have control on my end.
Okay.
So you should just be able to click your mouse. I mean, not your mouse, your space bar. Like, there you go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry about that.
Perfect.
Okay, so next we're going to get into intersection control evaluation, or ICE, and we'll start out with a high-level overview of the ICE process. So ICE has multiple stages, And so what we presented last meeting in January at our technical committee meeting was the results of our stage 1 analysis. And so at this point, we've completed stage 2. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. There you go. Okay. And so first we'll look at some alternative intersection types that we evaluated. So the first one being the restricted crossing U-turn, or RCUT. The main difference between this intersection and a normal intersection is that through movements and left turn movements are not allowed from the minor streets. And so as you can kind of see, these are the rerouted movements. If you are making a left or a through, those vehicles reroute through the U-turns, which on Minton will be located north or south of the main intersection. The next one we're looking at is the median U-turn. So main difference with this one is that left turns are prohibited on all 4 of the approaches at the main intersection, and again utilizes U-turns to make those movements through the intersection. So if you're on the main line, and then if you're on the side street, you can go through and right only. So a quick refresher of what we talked about last time and our results of stage 1 ICE. So after completing that analysis, the no build for each intersection is moving on or has moved on to stage 2, as well as specific alternatives that were evaluated in stage 2. So starting at the southern end of the corridor at Heald Road, so along with the no build, the traffic signal alternative was evaluated, which this provided an eastbound left with a shared through right on the eastbound approach. At Norfolk, we evaluated an RCUT, a median U-turn, and a partial median U-turn, as well as a traffic signal, and this traffic signal provided dual eastbound lefts with a shared through right. At Eber, we looked at 2 different traffic signal alternatives, one with dual westbound lefts and a shared through right, and one with a westbound left and a shared left through right. And also, I guess, just a heads up, we will go over each of these individually in detail. So this is just kind of a higher level overview of what we looked at. And then at Flanagan Avenue, Wingate Boulevard, and Milwaukee Ave, we looked at the RCUT, the MUT, and the PMUT at all 3 of those locations. And Henry Avenue, we looked at the RCUT, the MUT, and the PMUT, as well as 2 traffic signal alternatives, one with dual westbound left turn lanes with a through and a right, and one with a westbound left and a shared left through and a right. So next, we're going to go over a high-level overview of the methodology. So this is what we did in stage 2. So we began completing an operations analysis using Synchro software. Next, we did a safety analysis using the FDOT SPICE tool. Following that, we developed concepts for our alternatives. So for this, we selected Minton Road and Milwaukee Avenue as a typical location along the corridor. And so we developed a concept for an RCUT, a MUT, and a PMUT at that location. And that concept would then be applied typically at the other locations where we evaluated those alternatives. We also developed a concept for each of the traffic signals that were evaluated. And following the concept development, we took those concepts and based off of those developed cost estimates. So a typical cost estimate was developed for the RCUT, the MUT, and the PMUT, as well as a cost estimate was developed for each of the traffic signal alternatives. The last step was to use the FDOT ICE tool, which this tool basically takes into account all of the analysis that was done. So the operations analysis, the safety analysis, the cost estimates, all of that data goes into the ICE tool, and the output of that is a benefit cost analysis as well as a net present value. And these are kind of the numbers that we use to compare alternatives to make decisions. So getting into the concepts and what the typical concepts look like. So hopefully each of you guys have these. So we're going to go through these starting at figure 1. But if you want to look at it on paper or on your computer screen, that might be easier. So we'll start out with the signalized RCUT. And so basically what these alternatives provide is they allow for signalized pedestrian crossings at the U-turn locations. This is great for locations where if you want to have more pedestrian crossings, but you may not be able to signalize a certain intersection, an alternative like this allows you to signalize the U-turn, which provides additional pedestrian crossings. As we discussed earlier, you can see the loon that's provided there for the southbound U-turn movement. Looking at the main intersection, so again, this is the RCUT, and so the difference between this and the other alternatives, as you can see from the side streets, only the right turn movements are allowed. So throughs and lefts from the side streets are restricted, and those movements would make a right turn and then U-turn back. And then there is the U-turn location located on the northern end as well, also with signalized pedestrian crossings. And so the ARC-CUT came out with a high level cost estimate to around 2.24 million for design and construction cost. At this point, we don't have cost for right-of-way, as we haven't determined right-of-way costs yet for per square foot, but we could look into that in detail further if we choose to go with these. So next, we'll look at the partial median U-turn. So again, looking at the southern end, this is exactly the same. Provides the signalized pedestrian crossings, has the U-turn with the loon. The main intersection, the difference here is that the side streets are allowed to make left throughs and rights, but the main line, so the north-southbound approach, their left turns are restricted. And the partial median U-turn came out to around 2.3 million for design construction costs, so right in the same range. The last one is the median U-turn. So again, the southern end is exactly the same with pedestrian crossings and the U-turn. And the main intersection, we are restricting this time left turns on all 4 approaches. So throughs and rights are allowed, and you can circle back at the U-turn with left turns being restricted. And this also came out to around 2.24 million for design and construction costs, rough estimate. So digging into just the U-turns a little closer, so these were developed based on a CAD tool, and so we took design vehicles for this location. We took a box truck and a school bus. So box truck being your typical FedEx, UPS delivery type truck, standard unit 40-foot truck. So our loons were developed based on the right-of-way needed for those vehicles to make the U-turn. In this case, I think the box truck was the controlling vehicle, and that's what the right-of-way, the required right-of-way is developed based on in these concepts. So as discussed earlier, right-of-way may be needed for these locations where these alternatives are applicable. And with that, do we have a Mentimeter question for this one?
I'm thinking maybe Sarah, before we jump into Menti, why don't we just go back and so just kind of opening up the floor. I mean, any questions about the concepts or kind of what approach we took? Because this is really the foundation for what I'm going to be talking about for the next probably 30 slides. So
Travis,
you look.
Terry, I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Go ahead, Terry. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I don't have any questions. Well, actually, I kind of have a question on, and I'm sure there is reasoning why you would use this type of design versus what you see out there today. But I want to keep in consideration that you have transit vehicles that will be using many of these intersections. And what I'm not talking about our standard 40-foot fixed route vehicles that stop at a bus stop. I'm talking about our demand response vehicles that pick up residents at their homes and take them to their medical appointments and such. So coming along Minton and having to now make a U-turn at some of these locations may be not only impractical, but impossible. Unless, like you said, you've got the design for like a school bus, because some of our vehicles are going to be the size and length of a school bus. But just the feasibility of making the U-turn may be a little bit more complicated with the volume of traffic. So I just want to keep that in mind. And I might have voiced this before, and if I didn't, I apologize. But as I'm looking at it now, I'm just thinking about our vehicles trying to make these U-turns. And I just want to make sure that's something that is voiced. And it's actually, I'll say it's a concern that I'd like to voice.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the primary reason why we wanted to talk about it right now, is because we don't want to get further along in the process, not talk about this issue, and then we get to our preferred and we've drawn maybe 1 or 2 of these concepts up, and now we have to figure out what we're doing with all these U-turning vehicles. And I didn't want folks to come back and be like, oh, why didn't we think of this 4 months ago? So, I think that's a very valid concern, Terry, and one that, I think if it's an issue of not having the space to be able to make the U-turn. I think the loons help with that. I think, you know, in these designs, when we're looking at a box truck, you know, it's a 40-foot vehicle. I think most of the demand response would be hopefully shorter than that, I think.
They would be, they most of them would be. They're going to be 30, 35 foot. So
Right.
yeah, the ability to make the U-turn might be there, but just my concern is the volume of traffic allowing for that to happen.
Well, so under these conditions, these U-turn locations would be signalized. And so,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
as the, so let me go up one or two here. Let's do like this one. So if you're at this intersection here, and let's say that you have one of your demand response vehicles coming out, and instead of making a left, they now have to make the right and go U-turn. They would turn right, go into this new left turn lane here. They would stop, wait for their green light, and then they'd be able to make the U-turn to go back south. So
Okay. That actually is oh, so that relieves my concern. Thank you.
okay, awesome. And I think, I mean, we, you know, there is a discussion to be had about whether we keep the loons at all. But I think if it's, you know, when you're talking about demand response vehicles and things like that, I think you have to have it, because you don't want the vehicles over tracking on a, you know, potential curb and gutter, sidewalk, things like that. And so, yeah, that's a great point, Terry. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Scott?
So I'm kind of glad you looked at this particular intersection for this analysis, because it probably has the most side street traffic of all the ones you've listed, is looking at all three alternatives. Is that correct?
Actually, what's funny, so we'll go through each intersection and see kind of how all these alternatives fared. This was actually the one that worked the best for specifically the R cut. It worked really well for the R cut. What you'll see, and I don't want to spoil it, is that these intersection types don't really work as well with a lot of the other intersections, because there is a lot of side street traffic. So
Okay.
Yep.
But going back to the loons real quick, just to let everyone know, is, you know, we did reach out to Brevard Public Schools Transportation Department, and we're informed that there is quite a bit of bus traffic coming off and on these side streets. And so, you know, at that point we were already thinking the loons were kind of a necessity. So then, you know, coupling it with this demand, with the demand response vehicles, it definitely sounds like they are.
Hey, I have a question for you all. This is Christy, by the way. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that, like you give this example, you know, near the Papa John's and Waterman real estate, that vehicles, when they go into that pocket of that loon, it's not that they're staged there and waiting to flow into traffic. That's like a complete movement they can do without having to stop. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct. So let me go down to the one where we zoom in a little bit here. So if you're coming into this lane here, you would come up, stop at your red light, and then when the light turns green, which would mean these guys here coming northbound, they would be stopped. I don't know if folks can see my, yeah, there we go. Then they would come around, use that loon to then get into the outside travel lane. And you know, more likely than not, a lot of the vehicles using this may not have to use the full loon. And so, you know, this is designed for that bigger box truck, you know, that's going to have that wider turning path. When you have a car, you know, car, pickup truck, you know, you'll probably see them kind of use this area in here, much shorter kind of turning radius.
Okay.
Well, while we're talking about, sorry,
Go ahead,
Christy,
Scott.
go ahead.
Well, and I just wanted to make sure, because I've never seen loons in action, so I know how sometimes people pull over the side of the road. There's no chance that that would become like a broken down car place that you couldn't do that full movement.
I mean,
I
think, yeah, that just kind of, I think, turns into normal, or I guess normal emergency operations, I guess. I mean, it's like, you know, if you have a car break down and they break down in the outside travel lane, you know, us and what we're doing for our typical sections isn't going to prevent that. You know, it's still going to be blocking the outside travel lane. So if a car is disabled and they somehow make it into this loon area, you know, I mean, whether you had the loon area or you didn't have the loon area, that disabled vehicle is still going to be in that situation, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes, I mean, yes, it can be used how you're saying that situation could arise. But I think the odds of that happening are going to be pretty low, just in general.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Travis, this is David. I just put a message in the chat box with my phone number. I've got another commitment. I have to drop off here for
Okay.
for a little bit. But if there's any questions or anything, feel free to reach out at this number, and I'll be able to deal with that. Okay, thanks.
All right, appreciate it. All right, Scott.
Travis, this is Scott Morgan. Talking about the, you know, turning radius for a U-turning vehicle, you know, which is in this case the box truck controls. It requires more. But we've had this question with a land use item prior, so probably needs to be addressed, you know, even in discussion or slides. But for a fire apparatus responding and needing to make a movement.
Mm-hmm. That's something we'll check. I'm not sure on the dimensions of a fire truck versus a box truck. But I'll write that down. Because if the fire truck is shorter, then we should be in good shape. If it's longer, then yeah, we may have some issues with that. So.
Okay.
We know what the apparatus is at our current fire station that typically uses this corridor. It's the county station up at West New Haven and Pine.
Yeah, station number 82.
I want to say it's station 25, but I could be wrong with that number.
No, it's 82, Scott.
82, thank you. But we know what apparatus they have, and the likelihood of them getting larger apparatus, you know, is pretty low, simply because there aren't the multi-story buildings here. So, you know, I think having, you know, the really large vehicles that can ladder up and spray up, I think working assumption that this is sort of the ultimate apparatus is probably not a bad working assumption, that the county wouldn't upgrade to a larger vehicle in future years because we've got more, because we have high rise as opposed to not having high rise.
Right. So forgive me, I don't know my fire truck nomenclature, but so what kind of fire truck is it? Is it like the single, you know, fire truck, or is it the one that
it's
has
not articulated? Yes.
So it doesn't, or it does have the trailer, or it doesn't have the trailer?
Does not.
Does not. Okay, so it's just a regular. Okay. I guess quote unquote.
But they also,
regular.
within that scheme, they have larger and smaller, depending on, you know, typically to get to, I want to say 3 or 4 stories, they have a certain equipment, but then they need to get into the articulated beyond 4 stories.
Right.
Or desirable to. I mean, again, you attack it with what you can, but again, sort of the notion is whatever apparatus they have there now is probably sufficient for this analysis. If it requires more, but like you say, if it's shorter than a box truck, then it doesn't. But it's probably worth verifying, because that came up when we were approving a project that's right now under construction on the east side, north of Heritage Oaks.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds great.
So what is the size of a box truck?
It's 40
foot. The wheelbase is 40 feet.
Okay. So it's not a semi-trailer.
I don't think this fire apparatus is any more than that, but it's definitely worth checking.
I just did a quick Google search, and just a standard large fire truck is about 35 feet.
Yeah, I don't think what they have at Station 82 exceeds that.
Hi, this is Eric Flavelle, and I guess one of the questions I've got is, how close a tolerance do you have on these truck turns? Because I know, in designing projects that we get involved in, we look at the truck turns and, when you're sitting there with the template, you can click around until you get the right path. Is there enough tolerance in what's being proposed that if somebody doesn't hit it quite right, they're going to get through?
I mean, we always try to use our engineering judgment with this. We're not going in and tweaking it to a point where somebody literally has to hit it exactly, at a certain angle to be able to then turn the wheel at a certain time to be able to make the turn, or else they're not going to make it. I mean, we're just not going to be getting to that level of detail of tweaking it that good. So, I mean, what we're trying to show here is just a general representation of, okay, if somebody came up and they were going to make this turn, here's generally the amount of space that they would have to get. And I mean, regardless, at the end of the day, this is not a design. This is a concept plan. And so.
No, I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
But I just worry about this kind of stuff because it ends up being a circulation problem. If everybody can't get through and you have most of the truck drivers are great. They know what they're doing. They're all over it. And you have new truck drivers and you got to allow for them too.
Right. And I mean, at this stage, we're really just trying to figure out what our impacts are going to be. And right now, my big thing is, do we have to get right away or do we not have to get right away? And with this concept, it's looking like, at least for the Milwaukee intersection, if we do one of these alternatives, we're going to need right away at these U-turn locations. Whether the right away line, the proposed right away line, wherever my mouse is at, I don't know if my mouse is in here or not, whether the proposed right away line ends up at this exact spot or it ends up 5 feet off of that or 5 feet closer to the road. I mean, I think that's a decision that when we get into design, when the designers get into it, they're gonna have to say, okay, yeah, the concept was pretty good. We run our auto turn. We're comfortable with that truck turning, or oh no, we're going to need an extra 5 feet to push it. You're going to push it out an extra 5 feet because we think folks are going to be, not taking it as tight, But the initial kind of decision point of right away, yes or no, has been determined, as opposed to, oh, we don't need right away, and then you come back there and design and say, oh man, need all these U-turn locations. So.
Well, and again, it's sort of differential right away. I mean, in this case, we have an undeveloped parcel that, again, if this ends up being selected, when it develops, that could be a condition of development approval to grant a reasonable estimate of right away, even if it isn't fully designed. But if you went to the north end of this, that's an existing developed parcel. That's sort of a whole different right away notion, simply because now you're getting into an existing business's parking lot, and it's a different level of right of way acquisition difficulty.
Right. So Eric, did that answer your question? We're kind of somewhere in the middle, probably between perfect turning and somebody who maybe isn't really paying attention or isn't maybe is a new driver.
Yep. No, that answers my question. It'll get properly dealt with in design. We're just trying to see what we need here.
Yep.
Got it. Thanks.
Perfect. All right. So any other questions before we move into talking about the intersections specifically? Or I guess we got a Mentimeter first.
I actually am not positive that we have one right here. Let me check though. I thought it started after.
That may have been our loon question.
Yeah. Oh, so. You know what? That was where the loon question was supposed to be. You are correct. It makes way more sense now.
So, anyways, everybody already knows the answer anyway, so we're good.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, jumping into our stage 2 results. So as Ryan outlined, we went through the stage 2 process for each of our intersections, all the different intersection alternatives that we looked at. So what we'll do is we'll just walk through south to north, and we'll talk through our results. And then we have some questions. Hopefully everybody's still attentive and awake. We have some questions on what we want to ultimately advance to the public meeting here on August 26th. So Heald Road, we looked at our initial no build. This intersection is in pretty good shape. Level service A in the AM, level service A in the PM. We did get a request from the county after our meeting in January to go back and look at a traffic signal alternative where we looked at adding an eastbound left turn lane. And then it would have an additional shared through right as the right turn lane. So here's what that would look like. And as you'll see, so north is up. This is Heald Road, the west leg. We're adding that eastbound left turn lane. Then you have that shared through right. As you'll see, I mean, we're well within the right of way from what we could tell. You have really minimal impacts overall. You're adding a little bit of pavement to both sides of the road. It's all open drainage today. So it's all just kind of that rural typical section. So we would pretty much just keep that as is. We wouldn't be introducing curb and gutter, wouldn't be doing anything to really change the drainage characteristics of the roadway besides adding, you know, that 10 to 12 feet of pavement total, not on both sides, 10 to 12 feet total to add in the extra pavement for that left turn lane.
That's all in the existing right of way.
Yes, that is correct. From what we can tell,
nice.
it's all in the existing right away. Yep. So,
and what you'll it just again, I think we talked about this last time, but just to be clear, the property at the northwest corner is actually owned by Brevard County. So if there needed to be some encroachment to the north, it's already county-owned property that would not be an issue, you know, there.
Okay. All right, awesome. And so overall design and construction, I mean, this is really a relatively low cost project. We're looking around $40,000. If you're following along in the packet, this is figure 7. So you'll see that on each slide, let's see where my mouse is here. You'll see that on each slide we have in the lower left-hand corner the figure number as well, so that if y'all can keep track with us. So. All right, so then a very quick summary in kind of the more technical side of things. And so when we do this ICE analysis, we want to make sure that we're comparing back to our no build. We're calculating a net present value, and then we're calculating benefit cost ratios for a couple different metrics. And so what we do is we start off with our level of service. So we're saying, okay, we're level service A and B. We're looking pretty good. And the difference here, even though we go to level service B for the traffic signal alternative, that's like 10.1 seconds of delay versus the no build, which is like 9.5 seconds of delay. So it's like right on the threshold between A and B. So it's not like you're adding 30 seconds of delay for that alternative. So that's a little bit misleading on that front. But from a safety perspective, the traffic signal alternative, you're adding that left turn in, you're adding another left turn phase. So you're protecting those left turn lanes for a certain amount of their movements. You get a benefit on the safety there. Like I said, design and construction costs, obviously for the no build, it's 0, but we're 40 grand for the traffic signal alternative. Then we move into the outputs of the ICE analysis. And so the ICE tool that we use, it runs, it's an FDOT tool, it runs a program or equation metric thing in the background, and it spits out a bunch of numbers. And so one of those numbers is what we call a net present value. And what it does is it says, okay, over the life cycle of your project, which is 20 years in this case, your no build alternative is going to cost X amount of dollars to society. So it'll cost, for example, $20 million, okay? And that's the delay cost of society and the safety crashes that cost of society. And then what it does is it runs the exact same equations for your alternative. And it may turn out that your delays are lower and your safety is lower. And so let's say that the traffic signal alternative, the net present value, that the cost of society was $17,800,000, okay? What this net present value is calculating is it's calculating the difference between those two numbers. So it's saying, what is your total cost of society for your no build minus your or sorry, what is your cost of society for your alternative minus your cost of society for your no build alternative. In this case, the traffic signal alternative was $2.2 million better than the no build in terms of cost to society. So we always want to see, we like seeing positive numbers when we're looking at the net present value. I'm using my mouse on the screen, but I don't think it's showing up. So anyways, so we want to see positive numbers in those net present value columns. It means that our alternatives, when we compare to the no build, are going to be better for society overall over the life cycle of our project. Now, why that's critical and why I took the time to explain that is because you'll see that in other intersections, we do have alternatives that have a negative net present value. So that means that they're less better, they're not as good when compared to the no build in terms of those metrics. And we'll talk about that more here in a little bit. And then when we look at benefit cost, anything above typically 1 or 2, 1.0 or 2.0 is a very good benefit cost. What we see here is that this traffic signal alternative, we're at like 56. So we are very, very good. The benefit that we're seeing with the minimal cost for improvement overall makes really the traffic signal alternative a slam dunk project in our opinion. So before we move on, I think we have a Mentimeter question after this. Before we move on, any questions about the approach now that we've kind of explained how we put it into action? Make sense, hopefully?
Yeah,
This is
in this
Christy.
particular alternative, that includes not just the pavement, striping and so forth, but the modification to the track signal to provide protected lefts off the miners.
Yeah, it would include any modifications to the signal heads needed as well. Yeah. Now,
but obviously that means the existing locations don't have to be changed.
That is correct. Yeah, we haven't looked at it in that great of detail, but we don't. It's a mast arm, or it's not a mast arm. It's a span wire today, right?
Right, and I think the county's trying to go to, for other reasons, not that, but the mast arm. So obviously that cost doesn't include that.
Correct. Yeah. This would be just from a purely comparative standpoint. This would be, your pavement and then your adjustments to any traffic signal heads. If we were going to mast arms, in my opinion, that's an improvement that's kind of outside of.
Yeah. I mean, that might be $400,000 or $500,000 potentially.
Right.
With the distances we're talking about.
But ultimately, right. Mast arm or not, that's not going to impact the functionality, which is what the analysis really
the county could do this tomorrow and get the traffic functionality. That question would sort of be for hurricane and other reasons why they might want to ultimately change them out, which is their goal across, the county universe.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question for you all that on the east side where we're going to have that apartment complex building, we have them coordinate with the county. So if anything sort of got restriped in terms of those turn lanes and whatnot, would that impact your design or has no bearing on it?
I mean, we would probably call that our existing condition for any analysis because it would be kind of independent of what we would be looking at. But it would be good to know what is going to happen so that we can include that in our analysis.
Just more trips, but the lane configurations don't change. It's got two outbound lanes without changing the configuration. It just would have, right now there's hardly any trips on that leg. There'd be more trips, but nothing changed with the lane configuration.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if the lane configurations don't change, then there's really no issue there. And I think this was something that we had talked about when we were developing the concept because we were looking at that east leg as well. And I mean, if it's I think it was like a 300 unit apartment complex. And
that's sort of the end of the world. So that's sort of all the ultimate trips current plus that is sort of end.
Right. And so you're talking probably a handful kind of peak hour wise. And so I don't think it'll be enough to move the ticker when we're talking on that east leg, needing to do anything different or affecting the intersection. It's already a operating level service A. So if we add maybe 50 more vehicles in the peak hour, maybe it goes to B, but you're really not going to be having many issues. Okay. And then kind of going back, Scott, to your comment about the mast arms, what we've typically done for a lot of these corridor planning studies is assumed that any time that you're going to touch an intersection, that we would probably go back and include mast arms as a part of our concept and as a part of our cost estimate. And what we can do is maybe kind of break that out at each intersection and say, okay, especially for like Heald, because you don't need to do mast arms. We can say, okay, if you do include mast arms, it'll be, 200,000, 250,000, whatever it's going to be. But if you don't, then it'll be 50 or something, like that. If we're looking at doing these alternative intersections, like the R cuts, the different things, those are probably going to be mast arms. And so that's not really, that's more of a, you probably should do it as opposed to, well, do we need to?
Right.
Thing.
Right.
Okay. All right. So any other thoughts before we go to the Mentee poll?
All right. And I do have Heald misspelled on this. I apologize. But basically, what should move forward to the public workshop? Actually, I should have included both on here. Do you want to present the traffic signal alternative, or do you not want to? So imagine that including the traffic signal alternative is both the no build and the traffic signal alternative. Do you want to move the traffic signal alternative forward to the public meeting? And, as previously stated, if you don't feel comfortable using Mentee, you can unmute yourself, or you can use the chat box. All right, so it looks like we will be including the traffic signal alternative moving forward.
Perfect.
All right, Travis, you should have, yep.
All right, awesome. So next intersection, so moving a little bit further up, Norfolk. So this was one of our first intersections where we were really seeing some issues, especially in the AM peak hour. We had that kind of eastbound left that was coming out in the morning, and then the southbound left trying to use Norfolk Parkway, then get out to Palm Bay Road. So the alternatives that we looked at, the R cut, the median U-turn, the partial median U-turn, we ran all those through our ICE tool. And then we also looked at a traffic signal alternative, which was the dual eastbound lefts with a shared through right. And I will show what that looks like here. So as you'll see, we took a little bit of a different approach when we looked at the concept for this intersection. So let me see if I can get my pointer to show up here. So what you'll see, the first major thing that you'll see is that we took this eastbound lane and brought it further down towards the right-of-way line. And we wanted to do that to align that lane with the through movement approaching the intersection. So we could have kept the current kind of layout, which has that eastbound lane up here in this green area here, and then brought it down. But when you did that, you are now having that person go across 2 lanes of traffic. There's no conflicts there, but they would just have a pretty big skew to be able to go from kind of this point up in here down to where your through lane and your right turn lane is on the outside. And so we wanted folks to really kind of approach this intersection, you know, as they would kind of a typical intersection. You approach it in the through lanes, and then the left turn lanes flare out, and you can get into those left turn lanes. This also kind of oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we like that, and I think we talked about this last time, but we moved further. We actually have a signed agreement with a civil engineer to get us the 3 outbound lanes configured just like you have. In terms of the right-of-way, we have to cheat into the median in order to do that. But I think it's good. Now I'm sort of seeing how as you get further west, that makes a lot of sense what you just described, Travis. So if you don't mind, we'll you know, if we can get an image of this, we'll make sure our engineers get a look, so as they start this thing, it does exactly what you just described, rather than keeping, and obviously that increases the cost a little bit because you're, you know, not taking advantage of what's there and getting more asphalt in. It's a little beyond our current budget, but not significantly so. But I like that because it's sort of, we were trying to do it on the minimum just to get, you know, the approach to the intersection, but this makes more sense, and the added cost is not hugely dramatic over what we had budgeted.
Yep, and I think that yeah, Scott, we can coordinate with you on getting you what you need to send over to folks. And the other thing that we saw, and you know, we're working off kind of parcel lines, and you know, we may not be. I think your folks probably have actual right-of-way lines. Probably went out there and surveyed it.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of ways of thinking about what's the cheapest way to do this, and even though it means relocating a nice feature in the median, which it's not just grass and trees. We actually have a clock tower.
Right.
The clock tower comes pretty much curb to curb. Well, it's concrete block. We got it, you know, that ended up being the best of 3 ways that we tried to look and deal with FP&L. And so, but the lane configuration is exactly what we're looking to achieve here.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's good to know. That makes me feel good. So, all right.
But I
awesome.
we were going to try to keep the existing pavement, you know, just to keep our costs down, but it really makes way more sense to do what and more typical to sort of show what you've done, even though if we have to spend a little more money on asphalt and give up some existing roadway, it's better than what we were thinking.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing is it kind of tees you up for anything in the future. You know, if this road does 4-laned, that you know you kind of have the area, you know, already kind of set aside. You just come back in here, cut the median back, add your pavement, and then you'll probably tie in with this as well. You're kind of going down the middle, so you'd probably have to reconfigure probably past this point anyways to the west.
Well, and then we got another thing as you go further west. We got an elevation gain, which you don't expect in Florida, but we have an old closed landfill. So yeah, and we went as far to the north as we can there within right away, and so the future 4-laning comes to the south further west.
Right. Okay. All right, awesome. Well, so Scott, to further put your mind at ease, the traffic signal alternative was hands down the best alternative that came out of our ICE analysis. I think when you're looking at overall construction cost, and like Ryan had mentioned, we didn't lay out the R-cut, the MUT, and the P-MUT at every intersection. We just used that typical concept to come up with a construction cost. And so, you know, when we ran those numbers, we were looking, and it's just the other ones don't quite stack up just because of that turning volume that you have coming out of Norfolk. So, you know, I think with that, some of the one thing that we're going to have to think about with this intersection that's kind of an accessory is, what do we do at Carriage Gate? And something that we had discussed in one of our internal meetings was, do you make Carriage Gate a directional, where you make it left in, so you can go northbound and you can turn left into Carriage Gate, but then Carriage Gate coming out would be a right out only, so they wouldn't be able to make the left across Minton anymore.
Yeah, you're really going to have to talk to the county about that. It affects more of their citizenry. You know, I think the only thing that's in West Melbourne city limits is the church, and that's primarily a Sunday non-peak hour activity. So I don't know that West Melbourne would have a view on that, but the counties definitely have a view on that.
I do want to add, Scott, that remember there's some other commercial properties,
yes,
you know, that may or may not try to access,
yes,
you know, Carriage Gate. I've had some conversations about that,
yes,
and there's that 20-something acre property that wanted
yes,
to put 300 apartment units on it. So
right, so
that's the only thing
potential
I
more
want to add
trips,
in.
but right now it's full access, and people that have lived back there for years, you know, enjoy that full access. To me, it's not that big a deal to make it right out and require a U, but you know, they're not the citizens that would squawk to the West Melbourne City Council. They'd squawk to the county commission.
Right. Right. Okay.
From a traffic standpoint, it makes total sense.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, the reason why I brought that up is because when you have the R-cut, the P-MUT, the MUT, that affects what you're doing at Carriage Gate. It all kind of gets rolled into there. But if we just move forward with showing the traffic signal at Norfolk,
yes,
that leaves Carriage Gate.
Then it becomes its own analysis.
Yes, that is correct. And so, okay, well, that's good. What we'll do is we'll try to follow up with, well, yeah, we'll figure out how we can reach out to the county about that. And then what we may do is, at our preferred alternatives meeting, we may come with an alternative or two at that intersection and show the group what it could look like. We still have one more public meeting before this goes final as well. So, you know, just if we don't show anything at Carriage Gate at this meeting, doesn't mean that we're not going to get another opportunity to reach out to the public about it. So, so I think we got plenty of time to be able to sort that out. But, all right, so Sarah, you want to go to the mentee question? Hey, Sarah, did you? Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. All right, awesome. So it looks like we're all good. So we're going to cut the R-cut, the P-MUT, and the MUT out and just focus on the no build and the traffic signal alternative for what we're going to present at the public meeting.
What we like so far, you're making this easy. All right, Sarah, do we want to switch back? Perfect. All right, so moving up across the bridge to Burdock and Eber. So our no build here, so in the morning we were actually pretty good, but in the PM, this is where we were having some issues with the westbound lefts coming out. So really what we wanted to do was target that approach and figure out what we could do to make that better. The issues, so we may or may not have talked about this at our last meeting, but we didn't look at an R-cut, a P-MUT, or a MUT at this intersection just because of the close proximity to the bridge. So we didn't have enough space to provide that U-turn location going to the south.
without making folks cross the bridge. And so we didn't want to have to make people do that. So we just stuck with kind of those traditional intersection alternatives, which we had 2 of those. The first was dual westbound lefts with a shared through right. So that's just adding another left turn lane approaching the intersection. And then the second alternative, which we do not have a concept for, is just changing around the striping that's out there today. So you still have the 2 approach lanes. You'd have the exclusive westbound left, but then what you'd be doing is that outside lane, you'd be making that a shared left through and then right. I'll talk about some of the issues that we had with that approach and that concept. So first, like I said, alternative number 1, we were adding that second westbound left turn lane approaching the intersection. So north is to the right. As you'll see, we were able to get it in. We were able to not impact this box culvert that's right here.
Nice.
So we were able to get that in. You'll see we do have a little bit of pavement, a little bit of orange striping approaching the intersection, but generally we're leaving the widening to a minimum. With that being said, we do, when we approach the intersection, we do keep these lanes. I think they're either 13 or 14 feet wide, which I think is a little bit wider than what's out there today. So eventually, there's my mouse. So kind of in this curved part in here, and really what we wanted to do is make sure that if we needed to add a little bit more pavement to make these lanes a little bit wider, that we do that, so that when you have anything maybe a little bit bigger, a bus, a box truck, something like that, that you allow a little bit extra pavement for those folks to kind of come around the corner and line up before they turn left. So then what we did is,
so here you'd have all 3 lanes at the Chevron driveway, so somebody trying to cross those lanes would cross a little bit greater distance than they are today.
Yeah, and that was one that we hadn't quite looked at, and that would be one where if we wanted to still allow those lefts out, that it's definitely not ideal.
Yeah,
I would think that becomes a much tougher situation if we allow those lefts out, if we allow them to do what they're doing today. So I'm looking at Google on my other screen here. So yeah, the other thing that we could do is facilitate, well, yeah, that becomes a pretty difficult situation, because I was
It
thinking
already is now. It's already difficult to maneuver, and we already have people stopping the flow of traffic off of Minton because somebody's wanting to turn left as they're going southbound, or that's not southbound, eastbound on Eber Boulevard into the 7-Eleven. So I don't know what you're going to do with that. It's already a bad situation.
well, I really like having the 3 lanes, and it should be as far as it can be for queuing. I mean, and again, not having to change the box that was constructed not terribly long ago is terrific. But obviously that's an existing problem that needs to be thought about a little more. But generally speaking, this is a really good alternative for pretty low cost.
Okay. Well, Scott, I'm glad you bring up the lefts out, because yeah, like I said, that was something that we hadn't quite taken a really detailed look at. So what we'll do is, I think we'll still move forward with this, or we'll do a Menti to confirm what we want to move forward with, and I'll show you the results on the next slide. But what we can do is we'll come up with kind of some circulation diagrams, and I'll show you what one looks like. We had to do one for Henry for the USPS because of our concept there, and so we'll come up with a few of those and kind of show potentially, okay, if you left it as is, obviously they'd be making the left out. There may be some increased safety issues there, or you have the folks that are coming off Minton and trying to make the left in, which, you know, they don't have to do that. They could come up here and turn right and come into this driveway off of Minton. So that
But
movement,
they don't do that. They don't do that movement. They do the more dangerous movement.
Right, and I understand that, but you could put in a traffic separator here that would deter them, hopefully. Deter
Yeah,
them.
then they
Deter
got to
them.
make a U. Yeah.
Right. You know, and then so that could eliminate that kind of left across all these lanes, but then the left out is the more challenging one because, you know, those folks have a pretty direct access to then go east on Eber, but do you make them come out of this driveway, turn right?
Yeah, it's a long way out of their way to go eastbound. But
Right.
yeah, that's tough to cross that much. Now, obviously that makes more queuing space. So, but I think afternoon, PM, I think especially, you know, that gets even more challenging than it is today.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How many people actually come out of that chevron?
It's not a
Going-
whole
going-
lot, but it's just that because the cars are all blocked up through there, through that sagging F turn there, it's really hard to see. You know, you're focused on trying to go forward, and you've got this curve, and you've got this driveway that hits in, and if it's a little tiny sedan, you may not see it. And I've seen accidents there, and then also the other part of the S curve. So it's just, if you ask county, I'm sure they have all kinds of things to tell you about that particular stretch.
So we tried to convince them to put, you know, do not block intersection there. And for good reason, they told us that doesn't work, right? But to sort of get a clear zone in there through striping and signage. Right now, it's just signed that says don't block intersections. But where we've had some success elsewhere, we actually use the FDOT standard, you know, do not block intersection, put it right on the pavement, both directions, and, you know, but the county took that idea and said, we're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that makes more or less sense in this configuration, probably, I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, we'll take a look and see what we can do to see if we can minimize. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a safe maneuver today. And if you're at another lane, I would think that we would probably have to reroute folks. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable saying, oh yeah, let them make the left out across 3 lanes.
Well, from a traffic standpoint, that's a terrible idea, but obviously from a property owner standpoint, they covet that full access greatly.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. And then just a couple other quick things on this concept. So one thing that you'll notice is that we do pare this down to get it back to 2 lanes before we cross over the other culvert down here. That does come with some issues. So we're only accommodating 50% of our max queue in the PM peak hour with this configuration. If you wanted to go do 95th percentile, which is most of the time what people design their turn lane lengths to, you would be kind of extending down around the curve and kind of getting down here, and you'd have to widen this box culvert out. And so as of right now, we were weighing the kind of pros and cons of either widening the box culvert but getting your 95th percentile queue, or doing a shorter queue but not impacting the culvert. And we think that this is the better way to go, just because when you think about it from, you know, your queuing standpoint, that's 50% of your max queue. Your max queue is probably going to happen a couple times during the peak hour. You know, and that's for 1 hour out of the day. So you're talking maybe a handful of times the queue is going to spill back into this kind of 1 lane area across the box culvert. So we think keeping a shorter queue it'll be accommodating that queue probably 95% of the day, if not more, and you stay away from those kind of bigger impacts.
I think this is a great question to put to the county, and let them strategize about whether it might not be better to show a longer queue with the hope that someday this becomes federally funded. You know, I don't know. We know that we have on the C69 canal, that's a new box culvert that the city of West Melbourne helped the county fund. That one that comes in, I don't know the Melbourne Tillman name, but that's an older crossing. Is it corrugated metal or is it a box?
I do not know. Oh, I would have to get with.
Because again, if maybe the county might be able to get some help with upgrading something that needs an upgrade anyway, you know, to get the traffic benefit of better queuing in the PMP. But that's a strategic choice for I think, to really put to Brevard County Public Works, and, you know, again, kind of have it be their choice of that. I mean, for me, from West Melbourne, I think you probably put together a really good thing, but again, ultimately the county would want to someday, you know, improve that culvert and widen that part of the curb, but, you know, when and how is sort of the strategy question for them.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we'll follow up with them on that. So. All right, cool. So moving into the analysis, as you'll see, that first traffic signal alternative, which we just talked about, was the better alternative of the two. So benefit cost is pretty high. Present value is great. Design construction costs relatively low. The issue that you have and why this second alternative didn't work, when you go exclusive left and then you have the shared left through right, you have to split phase the signal, and right now they're running together. So the east and west legs are running together. It's fully permissive, so you can make the lefts, you can do the throughs, you can do the rights. You just have to yield to folks. When you do the traffic signal alternative number one, you do go protected lefts for those dual lefts, but then you're still allowing your permissive through movements, and then you still have the permissive left from the west side of the road from Burdock. That still goes all at the same time. So you're limiting the amount of time that Minton has to physically stop, wait for that minor street. When you go to the second traffic signal alternative, that all just pretty much gets shot because you're having to do now two different phases for those east and west legs. It really kind of blows things up.
And I don't think the county's gonna want that, not speaking for them, but knowing their history.
Yeah. So it's definitely a lower cost improvement, but doesn't quite get you what you need, I don't think. All right, so.
Oh, so we both hit the space key.
Yep.
So, Eber, are we comfortable only presenting the no build and traffic signal alternative 1, so cutting that 2 at the public workshop? And if you cannot get Menti to work, or you don't feel comfortable using it, please feel free to chat box or unmute yourself. All right, I have one person in chat box saying that they are comfortable. And we have 4 on the 5 on the Menti. So I think we can move forward. I'll switch back to the PowerPoint. Travis, you should have control.
Awesome. All right, so Flanagan. So to continue our run of easy intersection alternatives here. So Flanagan, level service A, AM, PM in the outer years, you're really not getting much traffic during the peak hours coming out of this intersection. We did look at an R-cut, median U-turn, and PMUT. And let me do this. And what you'll see is that everything comes out negative. So when you're going in and forcing the limited number of vehicles that we have coming up to this intersection on the minor street. We're forcing them to turn right, increase delay, driving along Minton, going down, waiting for the U-turn, and then driving all the way back. We see that these just aren't really that feasible of an alternative at this location, just because of the low volumes that we have. And so overall, our opinion, we think moving forward with a no build at this location would be the best option. You know, we don't want to throw an alternative out there and go, you know, present a bunch of stuff that probably isn't going to get built because it has a high price tag and it doesn't meet the needs of the project. And then also, you know, we look back at the historical crashes as well to see if there was a safety issue, and overall there really wasn't a safety issue. Sorry, my computer is deciding to freak out and try to install everything all at one time. That's nice. So overall, it's a relatively low number of crashes, so it wasn't really a high emphasis intersection for us. Anything that we do typical section wise would impact this location from a ped bike standpoint. So we would go back, upgrade the ped bike features. We would make sure that it all ties together on that front. And so that's kind of something to consider kind of outside of the intersection proper, outside of the intersection analysis, is that there would be improvements as a part of the typical section alternative. So, so any thoughts?
Pretty easy again. You're making it easy.
All right. Goes back to my motto of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Or I guess that's a lot of people's motto. It's not my motto, but.
All right, so are we comfortable with only presenting the no build at the public workshop? So basically cutting everything, all the analysis showed, you know, that really that's where we should go, and just keeping it simple. All right, very good.
Perfect.
Back to you. You should have controls. Perfect.
All right, so Wingate. So this was probably the first intersection where we struggled a little bit with the alternatives. So no build overall is in relatively good shape. And so what we're seeing is that this intersection, it isn't necessarily a traffic issue during the AM or PM peak hours. It's really a traffic issue during school times. And so especially in the afternoon when you're getting all the vehicles that are queuing along Wingate, and then it kind of spills back out onto Minton. But that really wasn't quite captured in the analysis that we did. We did look at an R-cut, a median U-turn, partial median U-turn at this intersection. And what you'll see is that unfortunately, none of these intersections met the kind of needs of the intersection from an ops standpoint. So no build operates fairly well. The issues, like I said, we were seeing were during those school times. And then what we noticed is when we're out in the field, especially in the AM peak hour going northbound, a lot of your queuing started at this intersection and trickled southbound. And it's because you have those extra pedestrian phases at that location during school times that really just aren't well factored into operational analyses. So this is a tough location because I don't think that there's a good solution from a kind of alternative intersections or alternative lane configuration standpoint. So I'm not sure that throwing an R-cut out there is going to fix all of our problems. I don't think that adding turn lanes is going to fix our problems, because I don't think adding turn lane, I don't think we have a capacity issue at this intersection. What we would probably, or what we're going to propose as a part of this is, instead of looking at alternative intersections, when we get into our preferred typical section, we're going to place an emphasis at this specific location to tie in all of those ped bike features for our typical section and make this a pedestrian and bicycle safety emphasis intersection by tightening up the curb return radii on the corners, making sure that all of our crossing distances are as short as possible, adding signage to further kind of enforce that drivers have to stop on red, they have to yield to pedestrians, and really try to emphasize that ped and bike safety. And so ultimately, I think it's going to be a lower cost alternative. It's going to be kind of like what we would call like maybe a modified no build, more or less, or an enhanced no build. I think it would be an enhanced no build. And so, that's kind of the approach that we're thinking we go with at this point, just because, those higher cost improvements, I just don't think are going to get us there in the long run. I don't think we're going to see the benefit from them.
So before we talk about possible solutions, let me just point out a problem, of current and whether or not there's some potential solving it, is exacerbating the walkers and bike riders that naturally cross at this location. In the morning drop-off, in order to avoid the fairly long queue, some parents go into the park and then have their kids push the crosswalk and walk across, right? So it's people who could go through the normal queuing at the school, but because they want to have a shorter drop-off time, the kids, for all practical purposes, are being dropped off in the park, push the crossing button, and we're getting more delay of traffic along Minton simply from a handful of parents that don't want to wait in the queue. And they're not necessarily doing anything unlawful from City of West Melbourne, traffic laws. They're violating the school policy, but they're lawfully parking in the school parking lot. Their kids are walking to the crosswalk. They're crossing properly in the crosswalk, but it's a shorter time period than staying in the queue with their parent, so the parent can get to work sooner. And so far, we hadn't figured out how to deal with that, because it's sort of enforcement of the school rule. You're supposed to be in the crosswalk and not. Now, there are some people that park in the library and jaywalk, and we stop that with law enforcement, but they're not doing anything that's unlawful by parking in the parking lot and walking and crossing at that signal. But there's a handful that do that each morning that exacerbates the number of natural crossers.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
we haven't been able to figure out how to address that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the issues at this intersection stem from, not a lot, all of the issues at this intersection stem from the schools and how traffic is circulated on site, or not circulated very well. That's creating a lot of these queuing issues and creating the parents that are impatient and want to go drop the kids somewhere else to have them walk to school because it's easier for them. Yeah, I was gonna say, Sarah, it sounds like we need to do a school routes analysis.
I was gonna chime in that we could make it a recommendation that we do a school routes analysis in this area. I mean, there's 3 schools. Well, there's 4 schools.
Yeah, and
right there.
One thing we've sort of talked to the schools about in the past, they have good safety by segregating the buses, and the buses have a signalized intersection, full access in and out, right? But it's only for the buses.
Yeah.
But we said, well, can you use that and still have good segregation where people get in and out, but use that? And the schools, for, again, probably good reason, want everybody, and now especially, secured through the front without having to build a bunch of stuff on the school, still having separated parents and buses, but they got a lot of room back there that they could queue up, not on the public streets, but it would require the schools to spend some money, and particularly for the sort of the new Homeland Security, school you know, limiting how people come through and get screened and all that good stuff. But obviously there's a lot of room back there that if the schools sort of cooperated with us, they could take a bunch of that problem and put it on their own property. They don't want to because it would cost a bunch of money. But
Well, I don't want to, speak for the schools, but, and I believe, yeah, Brevard Schools is on here if they would like to chime in, but, we'd be happy to put in the recommendations that this area needs a school routes analysis. And, when funding / time comes available, we could potentially do a specialized study just looking at improving the access to the schools right there in that bubble. Because as I was trying to mention, there's 3 schools right there. What is it? Central, and then the 2, oh my gosh, the name has left me.
Primary, yeah, the
Meadow
Meadow
Lane
Lane
primary,
primary,
Meadow
and
Lane
intermediate.
Meadow Lane, thank you. Thank you.
and obviously they all have different start times.
Yeah.
The middle school is the least problematic because it starts the latest and there are fewer percentage of parent drop off. But for the elementary, the primary and the intermediate, there's a lot of parent drop off, a lot.
Yep, I was out there when we did our field review. It's quite the busy intersection right there. All
And
right.
obviously the first couple weeks of a normal school year are the worst, and we're out there with a ton of law enforcement trying to get people to play by the rules and, be safe.
Right.
Maybe Corona's the answer. Less people coming in person. I'm just kidding. That was a bad joke and poor taste. So we want to jump over to Menti. Oh, come on. Sorry, I have my screen blocked by go-to stuff. So with Wingate, are we comfortable only presenting the no build at the public workshop? So not moving any of the alternative intersections forward, with the understanding that when we get into the nitty gritty after the public meeting, that it would be an enhanced no build. And
yeah, well, that sort of would be my answer, is neither yes nor no, but is there any way of having sort of that, even on a couple of slides or something, an enhanced no build, so it's no build and enhanced no build with some at least general descriptor, including, a recommendation for the study. That way it's, whatever can be done between now and then, but at least not saying that we're not going to do anything here or have people maybe perceive that we're not doing anything here.
Yeah, so the plan, Scott, is for the public meeting is we're not going to present the no build. We're going to present that kind of enhanced no build, and it won't be a concept. It won't be a concept. It'll just be like what you're saying. It'll be a board with, here's the intersection, here are some of the issues that we saw, and then here's some of the solutions that we think we're gonna flush out as a part of the project. And it'll be,
right,
like what I was saying, enhanced signage, better striping, maybe bringing those curb returns closer to the, shortening the curb return radii, so we're making people make sharper turns, which hopefully slows people down, things like that.
So the label on that probably becomes important. So I know enhanced no build is what we all sort of understand.
Right, correct. Yep.
So, yeah,
I'm okay not presenting the U-turn alternatives, and, but I think how we present that is going to matter a lot. The public reaction to this whole thing is probably going to be focused on parents with school kids that are very familiar with this.
And we can work on making our term, and we've already had a discussion previously, that we want to make sure that when we're working our terminology in a way that we're kind of rewording things out of our language and into the public's language. And so we're definitely mindful of we need to figure out a good way to label that and present it where it doesn't look like we're not doing anything, but and just we're not going to have it all flushed out though by August.
Okay, so I'm submitting my Mentimeter as yes,
Okay.
sort of with all this discussion being behind it.
I couldn't type all that out, Scott, and the Minty.
No, I know, that's all right. That's all right.
Minty only allows me a certain number of characters. All right, very good.
Perfect.
Let me just check, make sure I didn't get any. Okay. All right. You have control, Travis.
All right, awesome. So I think this is our last intersection, right?
No, we got Henry.
Oh, I'm one off. I always get a mix. All right, so Milwaukee, Heritage Oaks. So same thing. We looked at the R-cut, median U-turn, and the P-MUT.
Actually, Travis, can you just hold on 1 second? I just looked at the clock and I realized that we are technically over our meeting time. I understand if you have to get off. What I'll do is I'll post this recording to our website. So if you do have to log off, you can go back and listen to the recording and provide us with any comments or feedback if you can't hang in with us for a little bit while longer.
Okay. All right. So yeah, like I said, we'll go through this pretty quickly here. So at Milwaukee, so these were the three concepts that we showed earlier in the presentation. So if you want to refer back to what those could actually look like, it was the figures like 1 through 6. So what we found is that the R-cut was actually a favorable alternative at this location. And so no build, level service D and E. When we went to the R-cut, we were level service C across the board. So we were looking pretty good for the R-cut. The other ones were less favorable. I don't think we should move forward with those. And then we did have 5 ped and bike crashes at this location. And so doing the R-cut would hopefully help facilitate those movements, maybe break them up a little bit so that we don't have kind of those wide swaths of pavement without those median refuges. And you're adding in the U-turn locations to the north and to the south to facilitate pedestrian movements as well, kind of in this area. So
this would get us into right-of-way acquisition, south side fairly easy, north side much more difficult.
A little bit more complicated. Yep. And it could be tweaked. I mean, if I don't know how this may not.
Are there other possible northbound locations other than the one you picked?
Well, so what we tried to do was match it up with the USPS driveway because it ties into what we're going to talk about at Henry. But you could bring it a little bit further south. I mean, there's some
redeveloping parcels further south that doesn't get into an existing fairly new, meet current standards, nice office building.
Yeah, I mean, really, your only other area, I'm looking at the aerial right now, is really that next parcel to the south, whatever, I think it's like a house, I think.
Yeah.
It's set back, 100 feet from the road, and
right. Potential redevelopment parcel where again,
are you talking about the place
we could get some additional right of way at development.
Right.
Yeah, which parcel are we talking about, guys?
It's the one just here. Let me go back to the R-cut concept here.
Sorry.
It'll make a lot more sense.
There you go.
Yep, there we go. So, and this is the P-MUT, but it's the same concept. So this U-turn location here, we're kind of straddling the line between these two parcels. What you could do is bring this U-turn back so that your loon is kind of in this area here.
One parcel.
Okay, so let me interject and tell you that is going to be a floor shop design of the Times, and they're going to be, doing some lift station stuff, with private lift station though, and
How far are they along, Christy?
driveway. They were approved, Scott. Now the owner
Oh.
doesn't like the price tag, and they're going to redesign it. But yeah, the heat is supposed to take it on a fast track. So I had a feeling that's the parcel you were talking about. So that's important for you guys to know.
So they have full approvals of everything. That's what you're telling me,
Yeah.
Christy.
Well, building department was just waiting on them finishing their building permit stuff, but they're very
Right,
close.
but all the planning approvals.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
The
Well,
Google map shows it for sale, so I was all excited. I had mentioned that actually in
Well,
internal.
Well, and I guess
Buddy,
I'm sorry I didn't
had
realize
that conversation.
that was
Yeah, I had
there.
that conversation last week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as Travis said, you know, where the U-turns are established can be tweaked for within a, you know, a range.
Sure. Well, it's just easier to acquire one property than two. It's easier to acquire an undeveloped or redeveloping property than an existing one. But, you know, I think for concept purposes, given that, you know, the south one's not that difficult probably because there are no plans for that commercial yet. This one's the tougher of the two.
Yeah. Well, and this is, you know, the other kind of policy decision is, you know, do you forego the U-turn going northbound, and do you just make folks go U-turn at Henry?
What does that do to that? Anything? Because I don't know how many movements we're talking about here.
I'd have to, yeah, I mean, I'm just talking off the,
Right,
you know, off the
right.
top of my head. We would have to go back and check to see, you know, if is it 200 vehicles that are making the U-turn? Is it 50? You know, I don't know off the top of my
Right.
head.
Right.
That's another alternative, is you just forego that completely and make them go somewhere else.
Yeah, and the issue that I see is that there's not very many making a U-turn there when they're traveling northbound on Minton and then getting at Henry. So if you go from just a few to, you know, like you said, 50 or whatever the number may be, then you got to look at the signal and how you're managing those U-turns with the other turn movements, you know,
Right.
on Henry.
Right.
All right. Well, here, Travis, I tried to queue you back up instead of having to flip back through.
Yeah, and I think we're good. So I guess kind of the kind of summary of discussion is the U-turn, the northbound U-turn location. We're gonna have to do a little bit more. We're gonna have to take a closer look at that to see exactly where that gets placed. I mean, you know, Christy and Scott, I mean, from your perspectives, I mean, if we moved it a little bit further south and just did it all in that one parcel, is that a complete no-go, or would that be a better alternative than what we're showing it right now?
I think
Well,
that's better
my point was,
simply because
off.
you'd be dealing with one rather than two. Right now you're dealing with two. By the time this would get there, if that were the choice that were made, you'd be dealing with two people's parking lots plus whatever utilities.
Yeah, but my point was about the cost. You have a newly developed parcel. Let's say it develops, you know, in the next 2 years, and this isn't really ready for prime time for, you know, time after that. It just seems that there's going to be higher valuations on all that pavement and, like I said, private lift station and utilities and whatnot from the design of the times than from that shared Waterman real estate and design of the times kind of impact. So that's my opinion.
Well, and this is Eric, and as I recall, there was a lot of parking up front there that I don't know where they're going to put.
Yes. That's
I mean, there will be some issues associated with that, obviously.
Yeah.
Can you all send us the site plan for that?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, that would be really good to know kind of what they're looking at. Because yeah, I mean, if we're if they're putting parking right up to that utility line, because the other part is that the utilities are right behind the sidewalk there, and I think our loon, from what I was seeing, impacts at least one of those poles. And so if you moved it south, you could fit it between the poles. But if that's where, you know, if we're going to be impacting 5 parking spots for this new business, yeah, it becomes a much bigger problem, you know.
Well, I guess my concern is you got sort of, again, at a concept level, 2 businesses that become opposed to that consideration as opposed to 1. So if you really sort of want to keep that alive, at least through this, then you're probably better off showing it 1 and not getting 2 different businesses, you know, opponents of that concept, you know.
Right.
Okay. Now, whether that ultimately makes it or not, you know, obviously you've done the ICE analysis, and, you know, I guess I think we ought to bring, you know, the no build and the R-cut forward. You know, it gets the improved level of service. It has a reasonable, you know, benefit cost. Yes, there's a cost, and, you know, whether 2.2 million is the right number or something different at this point than, you know, what we're using. I think it's not going to hurt to bring it forward, and if through the public process it gets kicked out because we've got 1 or 2 businesses and anybody else that just doesn't like the idea of U-turns.
Right. And I mean, at the end of the day, the no build isn't operating that bad. I mean, E is kind of right on the front of the Brevard County level service target. So, I mean, we're not really that far off, and you're talking 2045 because it's operating okay today. So, you know, ultimately, if the no build is what comes out of the public's, you know, out of the public meeting, you know, I don't think that that's a bad alternative either. You know, I just think the R-cut is better, minus the issues that we're talking about. So, but okay, that sounds good. Well, Scott, I think you kind of teed us up for our mentee.
There you go.
So. All right. Oh, hope I am unmuted. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, Milwaukee, are we comfortable only presenting the no build and R-cut at the public workshop? We feel like, you know, we should still present the R-cut at the public workshop, even if it turns out, you know, we can't really move anywhere with it after that. All right, and I have yeses in the chat box, so I'd say we're good. And let me turn it back over. Oh, I don't know why I'm now on 2 different ones. Turn it back over to you for it is our last one this time.
All right. Finally, we've made it all this way. All right, up at Henry. So this one's a fun one. Save one of the best ones for last. So we looked at a couple different things. So obviously the R-cut MUT, PMUT, and then we looked at a couple different traffic signal alternatives as well. And so one of those was the dual westbound left with the through and the right. So you'd have a 4-lane approach coming westbound approaching the intersection. And then we had another traffic signal alternative, which we came up with Sarah's idea after our meeting back in January. And it was to limit the amount of impacts that we had along Henry, especially when we're looking at our access management for the USPS, and looking at doing a westbound left with a shared left through. So the middle lane would be a shared left through, and then you would have your exclusive right turn lane on the outside. So, let me go back to here. And so what we want to do is show what the alternatives would look like. So our first one, this was alternative number 1. We're adding those dual westbound left turn lanes. Then you have your single through lane and then your right turn lane to the outside. As you'll see, all the orange is new pavement. So we're adding that, pushing that to the south. Looks like we're staying within the right-of-way line, which is nice. We're still able to get
we can get that much lane in right away?
I mean, from what we're seeing from what we're seeing, the blue is our right-of-way line here. And so we even have a little bit to spare as well, even with the side.
What's the source of
I think you
right
can
away?
see the sign for the post office in the corner, right? The little monument sign. It's sort of visible in the overhead. I mean, if that's really true, that's really great. I mean, having that much room without having to get into the box on the north side or being on the post office property on the south side.
What's your, this is Eric, what's your source of right of way? Is it just bringing in the assessor's parcels maps?
Yes, yeah, and then we're checking it versus the property appraiser as well.
Yeah, I think this is a little tighter than you think.
Yeah, I think it's because we just had a development that comes out to the east of what you're looking at there, and it's a lot closer to the back of the sidewalk, I think.
Yeah, and this is Christy. I just wanted to let you know, Travis, if you didn't know this, that unlike Orange County and some of the other counties, this property appraiser has not done the ortho rectification of property lines. So property lines are okay in some areas, and other areas they're way off.
Okay.
So.
That's good to know. That's good to know. So just kind of by my measurements, you know, it looks like we have about 14 feet from the edge of pavement to the back of sidewalk, existing sidewalk on the south side of the road. Right
That's
now.
clearly wrong. There's no way it's 14 feet.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at Google, and I'm measuring it off Google, and so going from the lane line, the south lane line, to the back of sidewalk, it's 14 feet.
Travis,
to the sidewalk. Yeah.
do you want me to send
Correct.
you, give you control of the screen so you can pull that up for everybody, or no?
No, we'll
Okay.
just, no. I mean, all I'm trying to say is that, you know, yeah, I think if that's the case, if our right-of-way line is closer to the back of sidewalk, then I think we'll have some issues with this concept. And what I was trying to say is I was trying to figure out if we had enough space between the back of sidewalk where we could squeeze it in, and it doesn't look like it, because you'd be adding, you know, 11 feet. That'd give you 3 feet left over for the sidewalk, and you'd need at least 6, or you need at least 3 more for the sidewalk. So, yeah. Okay. So I guess how can we go about getting more accurate right of way for this, for in front of the USPS then?
Scott, do we have anything from when we did the lift station?
I think it would be when we did the Henry Avenue improvements, when we put in the box in the Melbourne Tillman and added the right turn lane. And we ended up with some sewer improvements that got kind of underneath the asphalt sidewalk a little bit further east. But again, sort of what I've been told is the right-of-way at the corner is fairly close to what exists with the little asphalt sidewalk. It's just, that's not that far from the post office right-of-way. But yeah, I'll talk to Keith about what we have, and we'll send you what we have. But I think this one may not be available unless you probably are, now, whether the post office would say, sure, improve our Henry frontage, you know, they might. But when we were doing our project before, we were trying to stay out of that.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I'll ask Keith to see if we've got some stuff and send it to you, Travis.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. That would be great. Well, it makes things a little bit more interesting. If we can't move forward with this concept,
Well, you had another alternative, which was to create the through as a through left.
yeah, the issue with that one is that it doesn't work from an op standpoint. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that it works less favorably than the no build. And so, but it still does meet your level of service target though. So it's still level of service D. But like I said, why improve it if it's not going to be better than your no build? So that's kind of the decision point, is that you do get some safety benefit because you're ultimately splitting up your split phase in the signal, eastbound, westbound. So you're doing protected lefts on both of those movements now, or those movements are inherently protected lefts, but your level of service isn't as good. So, but yeah,
So I guess I'm having a hard time visualizing that. If I've already got existing protected lefts off of Henry going both directions on Minton, and now I've got a through left, I guess the question is there another alternative of a double left and a through right?
The issue that you have is the skew going across the intersection. So when you're so this is your existing configuration right now, the single left through and then the right. If you push this through to the other side, you're dealing with skew issues as you approach the intersection to get in the through lane. So let's say that somebody's hitting this on a green and they're going 30 miles an hour. You're now having to make that transition over to the outside and then also transition back through the intersection. Makes that move fairly difficult, I would say. And then on top of that, you'd probably have to go in, maybe make some additional pavement improvements on the northwest corner, potentially impacting the canal as well.
Yeah.
If you wanted.
Well, we ended up with that sort of for budget, right? It was okay. We can only afford so much, box on top of the canal and sort of get what we could get. And
right.
Now the good news is we're expecting this intersection to actually for the PM left turn movement, because we are extending Heritage Oaks and Doherty. Our models show that as having a smaller movement in the PM peak than current, simply because there's enough people that would take the Doherty extension and Heritage Oaks to get to Heritage Oaks, and even some through trips to the Milwaukee side. So, it almost speaks a little bit better for the no build, because we think we might get current conditions to be better as the baseline condition with that project.
Right.
That intersection gets the most benefit of that project of any of the locations that we studied.
Yep. And that makes sense. And I mean, by no means the no build, we're not projecting that to be broken in the future. This was just something that, we had noticed some issues coming westbound. We wanted to try to alleviate the queuing that we had there. And so, it'd
be good if there's right of way, and the post office would play if there's not. So I think it's probably worth moving it forward at this point. We will send you what we have, but it may end up being one of those ones where, we can't say it's no right of way requirement if, we need 15 feet from the post office or something.
Yeah. Now, so kind of going back to constructability and shorter timeline to get these improvements in place, if we found out that there was going to be a right of way constraint, for alternative number 1. Is that something that we still want to move forward with to the public, or is it something that we want to take it off the table at this point?
Well, I'd like to see it at least move forward. I mean, I think the public would like this because people that live in West Melbourne, off of Minton, south of Henry, enough of them do that PM drive that there'll be public support for something that makes that better.
Okay. All right, so what we'll do is we'll take the concept that we have, we'll adjust the right-of-way lines accordingly, and we'll show that right-of-way impact that we think is there, and then we'll go from there. The one thing that I did want to make everyone aware of is I flipped through these graphics a few times, and we did go to the effort of looking at the access management for this, and so when you look at this concept, because you're adding in that extra left turn lane, we wanted to limit the folks making a left out. So very similar to the Eber situation with the Chevron driveway. We wanted to try to limit that. And we were keeping this second access over to the right. We were keeping that open because that's just employees and the USPS trucks. So we wanted to keep that open, give them full access. So what does this look like from an impact standpoint? So if we're trying to enter that driveway, so the left side is existing, the right side would be proposed. What you'll see is the only movement that's impacted is this movement number 1, this left turn in. So you won't be able to make the left turn in anymore. You would have to essentially circle the block, come down and make a left turn down at this driveway here. And how this plays a factor is with the R-cut recommendation from Milwaukee. So if you all, so we're a little bit north of that U-turn location here. So what we could do is we could add a secondary left in here, there we go. So we could add that kind of secondary left in here. This would essentially become a signalized directional median opening. So you'd have your northbound U-turns from Milwaukee, and then you'd be able to facilitate those left turns in from those people that need to use the post office as well. You could bring it all under signal control, really kind of clean that area up and provide.
Wow, well, then you don't, yeah, then the Henry access becomes way less important.
Right, exactly. And so that's how you affect, or that's how you alleviate the entering. How you alleviate the exiting is a little bit more cumbersome for folks, but not too bad, I don't think. Is number 1, coming out is still the same way. 2, 3, and 4 to go west, south, and north. You would need to then exit via that new kind of signalized driveway. The driveway is already there, but we would signalize it. And then folks would just come out of there, make a right turn. It would be under signal control, so they wouldn't have to fight traffic to come over, make the U-turn, or make the left, or go through. So these were just some of the things that we were thinking about as we were flushing this concept out. So.
I would think that the post office might like having full entry access from Minton and full signalized entry access, despite sort of a little bit more challenging on the exit.
Right.
I would guess.
Right. But yeah, so these are just a few things that, you know, if we decide to take this to the public, this alternative, that we could have these graphics with it to show that we're thinking about the impacts to the site itself, you know. So any other thoughts about this before we go to our Menti question?
All right. Top over. Are we comfortable only presenting the no build and the traffic signal alternative 1 at public workshop? So dropping Alt 2 and off the table. And keeping Alt 1, whether, even considering that we might end up with right-of-way constraints we don't know about yet. I know we've lost a couple people, so that might be it on our voting. All right.
All right, perfect. So we're almost done, I promise. I think we only have like 2 more slides or 1 more slide. So I once again, I appreciate everybody's time. Sorry this went a little bit longer, had a lot of content. Like I said, it's been 7 months and a coronavirus since we met. So next steps is we're going to take all of your comments. It sounds like we were all in agreement on the alternatives that we want to present at the public meeting here in August. I think we'll go through and kind of clean up some of the things that we had heard, especially at Henry with the right-of-way, making sure that we show a right-of-way impact based on any kind of maps that West Melbourne can send over to us. If we can't find anything, or if we don't have anything, we may just assume that the right-of-way line is pretty close to the back of sidewalk and show an impact anyways, just to be conservative. So we're okay doing that. We had talked a little bit about Eber, talked a little bit about Milwaukee as well. So we'll clean up some of those concepts, and then also the enhanced no build at Wingate and kind of flushing that out a little bit more as well. So that's really what we're going to be doing over the next little bit more than a month here. So I talked through all this, and then what we'll do is we'll probably shoot, once we create a summary of the public meeting and the voting and what the public really kind of thinks about these different alternatives, we'll send a summary out to the group. And I haven't talked with Sarah about this, but maybe we send another kind of poll out that says, okay, for the preferred alternative, what do we want to move forward with? And so instead of bombarding you with another meeting, we may go that route, or if we all want to meet again, maybe do something, we can figure that out as well.
Well, we could easily send out a Google Forms that is much less, it's, I don't know if everyone's familiar, but it's very simple, and it can also be printed out if you're more comfortable using it as a handout versus a virtual summary, and we will be using the Google Forms format at the public meeting, and so we could easily send that out and give you guys a couple weeks.
Yep. Yeah, I had a question about going forward schedule. I wasn't paying that much attention, but certainly we're going to try to convince our individual city council members to attend the public meeting so they become familiar with the project. I think they have very little familiarity at this point, but that would be a great way for them to learn a great deal about it. But assuming I've been unable to get 100% council participation in that, somewhere in the schedule, is there an opportunity for at least some sort of workshop briefing kind of thing before we get to end game?
So Scott, in the scope, if I correctly, I did include a final presentation to your city council. If you feel
great.
like we need a presentation in between now and then, it would not be included within our scope of work for consultants.
So one trip to the city council is included.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine.
So that'll be in the February-March time frame.
That's fine. But that would be prior to TPO process, CAC, TAC, board, etc. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yes, we could do that one in February and then TPO in March. But Scott, if you feel like we need to have one with more time before finalizing, we can. You would get me. You want to get Travis because I don't have them.
Okay, but we
but-
still have Travis scheduled for one. Okay, so whether it's one earlier or one later, sort of doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, but we'll know a lot about the public meeting. If we get all of our council members there, they're going to know what it is, right?
Yeah, and also there'll be the.
If I'm only able to get 3 of them there, then
get the other 3 in January. If you can only get 3 in August, get the rest of them in January.
Yeah, right.
Which also you might have had turnover through the election. I don't know what your ballot looks like this year.
Yeah, we got an election in November, so we could have some new.
But if you ever need support and trying to talk to them, TPO staff's always here, and we can get resources.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if in terms of full support, we've got one scheduled, which is good.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Scott, I think I kind of know what you're getting at. And yeah, you'll have, this public meeting in August, you'll have the public meeting in January. And, if you think that we want to do that meeting, if you think that having, that meeting to your council would be better before prefer alternative development. And then, we could, either Sarah could come and present the final, or we could send you materials and you could share it with them internally. I mean, really, once we get to the preferred, things aren't really,
right.
I'm not gonna say they're not gonna change, but it's just, that it is what it is. It's just drawn up and it looks nice and shows a little bit more about what we're,
and maybe we can be a little creative. Is okay. We have a public meeting that's city council 5:30. You're here anyway. Sort of a here's what we're going to talk about tonight at the public meeting. Public meetings at 6:30, whatever. It's one trip.
So the great part, we didn't talk about this, and we're still working on finalizing details, but the public meeting, I think we're going to keep that open for 2 weeks online. And so the actual quote unquote public meeting, we think is going to be a short presentation that we're going to record and then put on the public meeting website. And then that website is going to stay active. It'll stay active for a few months, but it'll be active in terms of getting public comment for about 2 weeks. So if your council members can't not physically, but virtually attend the night of the 26th, they can get on anytime 2 weeks after that.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So your public meeting on August 26th is going to be 100% virtual. You're not allowing anybody to meet up with anybody in person.
Correct. Yeah. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear in
no,
my email.
That sort of solves the problem. Is okay if you can't do it live, click on this button and you'll be up to date. So that sort of solves that.
Because it's going to be recorded, if you have a council meeting in those 2 weeks and you have time on your agenda, you could take the recording and you could basically force them to watch it.
Correct.
Include it on one of your agendas. And I don't want to tell you what's your council, but
no. That's so again, if somebody's got a business conflict, they can't watch it live. They've got the ability to watch it at their leisure.
Yep.
Well, that probably solves the problem then.
Yep. And we're not sure obviously what the January public meeting is going to look like at this point. I'm hoping we're back in person. Because there's a lot of good feedback that you get just from personal interaction. But that doesn't mean that we'll just have to wait and see. I'm not willing to make a commitment at this time.
Right.
Yep.
But Travis
that was
sorry.
Really good, Travis, and that was a great way to walk us through.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's time. It was a lot of content. That was a lot of content to go through. So sorry we went a little bit over, but great input. I appreciate everybody's thoughts, ideas. We'll go back to like I said, we'll go back to the board a little bit on a few of these, and we'll get ready for the meeting here in August.
But you're also going to touch base with the county on,
Eber.
oh my
Yep.
gosh, what's the name of the neighborhood where we have the church, Christy?
Calvary Chapel?
Oh, for
No,
Carriage Gate. For Carriage
Carriage
Gate.
Gate. So you're going to talk to the county about Carriage Gate. You're going to talk to the county about Eber approach, second culvert, and sort of figure out a little bit more about the Chevron driveway.
Yep. Yep. We will attempt to reach out to them and get some feedback on that. So.
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right. Well, I'm glad we're on the right track with, what we had kind of flushed out internally. And as Travis was saying, for our August 26th public meeting, we have made the decision not to have it as a in-person meeting due to the impacts of the global pandemic. We just would like to continue to keep people safe and secure. And so what we are going to do is August 26th, there will be a formal presentation via GoToWebinar. And then we are actually building out a website that will have, it'll almost be like you see the boards that you would see at a public meeting. So you can walk through all the info. You'll be able to see the recording of the presentation. And then there'll be a Google Forms where the public can actually provide feedback. And Christy and Scott, probably what I'll do is I'll mail you guys out or drop you guys off a set of paper Google Forms, just in case you have anyone that's like, I couldn't get that silly Google Forms to work or something.
Okay.
But you don't have the links set up yet, obviously.
Nope, we're still building.
But once that becomes known, we might have an opportunity in our next city newsletter to have a little article, and here's the link, and you can participate.
Yep, we would.
There's an opportunity to get something to where we're already putting out to the public information that we could incorporate if the link is available by the time we have to publish.
And when is that? Is Christy sent me the clerk's
Oh, now you're
email.
going to make me ask the city clerk when the deadline is.
Yeah. So I have her email if you want me to email her.
Cynthia?
That would be a good idea.
Okay. So yeah, we're gonna be writing up a press release and such. Abby is, and so we'll get that over to the city clerk hopefully by the deadline. But I'll email her.
Well, we can certainly get it on our webpage, but it's nice. We publish the newsletter 6 times a year.
Yeah.
And it gets mailed in every water bill, so
yeah,
it's a pretty good communication piece that we know people look at.
Yeah, so I'll email the clerk tomorrow morning, and I'll CC you and Christy on that to get the final dates. And then
that's a timing thing.
Yeah, the other question, Scott, was your social media. Abby does all of our social media, so can she? Is there a contact that she can, send content over to get, on your Facebook and Twitter and such, or?
Sure. We simply take what's on our web page and push it out to Facebook. We don't do any other social media.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Thank you.